Welcome to Dungannon, a Tyrone town which has made its own contribution to the history of the island of Ireland. The Hill of the O'Neill and Ranfurly House are part of that story. This was also the setting for the launch of a Peace 3 funded project called Shared History, Shared Future. In the exhibition inside the centre, you'll find a wall of fame celebrating 18 prominent Tyrone people. Some of them feature in our story. Shared History, Shared Future encapsulates figures of literary importance, such as William Carleton, through to the social history of local engineering and entrepreneurs, such as John Finlay and Sylvester Mallon, pioneers in quarry machinery. The diverse groups brought together for this project also explored the history of our waterways and townlands. The 5 societies came together to share with each other their own expertise and use it towards a shared understanding of our history and future. Killishall and Clonanese Historical Society, South Lough Neagh Historical Society, William Carleton Society, Donaghmore Historical Society, and the Caledon Regeneration Partnership. 3 of them recorded their activities, and their work can be seen in this video, which we hope gives you an historical flavour of Tyrone.
When the flax arrives at the scotch mill, it's put through the rollers to break the outside of the flax, make it limp in preparation for scotching. It's then passed down to the scotching room where it is scotched, and all the shows have to be removed from the flax, and that leaves a clean fibre. The fibre was sent to Cookstown Flax Market every other Saturday, where it was inspected by the grading inspector, and if it passed, it was sent on to a linen mill in Belfast, where it went through several processes and before it became Irish linen.
Gladys, can you tell me a little bit about Granda's life and some of the things that he created and how he became so successful?
He was born in Vale, and he moved into the north to a place called Lismullydown near Caledon when he was about 17, I think. When he lived in Vale, he spent all his time with a local blacksmith whose name was Jemmy, and I'd love to know who he is or what his second name was or where he was, because Daddy was then nicknamed Jemmy. All his life he's been called Jemmy, particularly his brother called him Jemmy all the time. He moved over to Lismullydown and the farm there. So then he moved down. He moved here when he got married. I think he revolutionised the construction industry and the quarry industry with all the stuff that he invented. Starting with making blocks and all the stuff that's done to aggregate, where it's mined all over the world. They're mining diamonds and they're mining gold, and it's all his equipment that's been used for that type of thing. It's really, there's that much that you really couldn't even list it all out, all the stuff that was invented. And what he invented one thing, then he would go on to improve it and improve it again, and that's still going on to today. And it's all over the world, and his name's known all over the world. Okay, Emma, I want to show you where Daddy started off up here. It's quite small, and you just won't believe it when you see it. This is the shed here, and in fact, the little place on the top, which is only about a little over a metre wide, there's a chimney put into it. He built a chimney, and he took the steel out and used coal to bend the steel. That's how he started first. And then he progressed to this shed here.
The bigger shed.
The bigger shed. It was all stone, and obviously he made the blocks for the rest of it. And obviously when he started to make the blocks then, it's just a mix match of everything.
And these are the blocks he made himself.
He would have made them himself, but they would have been made just singly in like a mould, one off at a time. This would have been the area that he would have started to make the blocks here. He put down a little bit of concrete, and he had a machine that made 4 blocks, and the way it was like a tray and the shape of 4 blocks sort of in a row, and
A mould.
yeah, 4 moulds. And you brought the aggregate down. You took the aggregate, was mixed from a very basic mixer, and you took it down in like a wheelbarrow, and you tipped it into the thing, and you had a scraper, and it scraped the aggregate into the moulds. And then he had a motor that made a vibration because it had to be vibrated down. So it vibrated it down, and then the machine moved off to do the next 4 blocks. Very, very basic. And then at night there was no additives that you could put into blocks in those times. So at night, in the winter time, you had to come down and cover all the blocks with with sacks, probably that potatoes were in or something like that. And then in the summertime, because they were drying out too quickly, you had to come down and water them, to keep them thing. Nowadays you don't have to do that.
And people were really interested in this machine.
They came from all over Ireland to see how this machine worked, and he sold it to all sorts of parts. The first blocks that were made were huge blocks, so these were refined to 4-inch blocks, which were much handier for men to use and to build with. The cement was taken from, I don't know where, I think Belfast, and I can remember it was taken on the back of a lorry with a tarpaulin over it. It was loose, and it was tipped into a bin. There was no silos at that time. And the aggregate, the mixer was so basic. You had men that just shoveled the aggregate into the bottom of the mixer, and it was taken up and mixed then with the cement, and trying to get the consistency all right. I want to take you up to see the place that he really started in here first. You won't believe how small it is. Tiny. And that's where the fireplace was, just there against the wall. You can see the remains of it. And that's what he took the coal, any coal Mummy had for the house. He used it out here in this shed to bend steel. They used to make the pipes, the concrete pipes, in this part. The pipe machine he invented as well. How did it work? You sort of had the aggregate coming down, and you had a mould, and it poured into the mould, and you sort of, a man sat down very low into the ground, and some of it was perforated. So he had a little gun and he perforated it, and then they made a seal on the top, and you just took the mould up and left it, and took the mould off it, and then you had to let it set. His mind just went ballistic in trying to make one thing after another, and he slept very little, and he'd waken up in the middle of the night with an idea of something, and he'd have to write it on the wallpaper.
He drew it on the wallpaper?
He drew it on the wallpaper. And he used to send me back up to the house to get copy a design or something that was on the wall. And mostly all of his drawings were done on, he smoked cigarettes, and the player packet opened out flat, and nearly all the drawings that he did on sketches that he did were all done on cigarette paper. The thing opened out. In the start you couldn't get material, there was nothing to be got. It was just after the war, and nearly all the stuff that he used at the beginning was all from the agricultural industry.
And did the government help out?
Later on, yes, I have to say they did, but that would be later on. That would have been in, say, the late 60s and 70s, because they wanted to employ people. There was mass unemployment in this area, and they did give grants, and they really meant an awful lot to get the grants at those times. This was the first building here, and actually this was the stores. change. It's the same as it was. And then, of course, he then bought the place up at Tullyvannon. He wanted it because it was on the main road, and it grew that big that it went actually from Tullyvannon right into another townland.
Yeah.
He hated to see young people that didn't have work, so he would go to somebody's house if he knew there was a young person there, maybe then up in bed, and he'd go in and he'd say to the woman of the house, "If you're a young fella here, and go on upstairs and get him ready, I'll take him up to work now." And then he'd say to her, "You making a cup of tea?" And he'd have the teapot hid. He'd hide the teapot. And she'd be all looking round trying to get him a cup of tea. Yeah, he was great for practical jokes.
Good sense of humour.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing that he came such a long way from trying to build a compressor with his brother Bobby in a shed which exploded as a child, to creating some very sophisticated machinery, and especially, hearing what you said about, Grant on his deathbed saying that he still had plenty more ideas. It's pretty spectacular.
And the machines are they're basically the same concept, but today, like, they're 60-ton weight, and a child could move them with a remote control. So, to start from that is really something.
From the period of what we're talking about here, 1958-60, engineering always had existed in different levels, sometimes very busy and other times slacker. But as you can see today now, in 2013, it's still developing and manufacturing different equipment here for different international companies here, and hopefully will in the future. If we were sitting talking about his greatest invention, or that, it would be no doubt the portable screener, because in them days, it started off 50, 58, 59, 60. It ended up today, 2013. I'm all right, a lot bigger and a lot better, but at the end of the day, it was still the first prototype, or the first portable screener and the first principle that started off.
I might have told the story about he was young and he was going to Dungannon, and the police stopped him. He had been spinning about the roads, maybe driving too hard, and the police stopped him to dress stone, and the policeman knew him, and he got in beside him, and they're heading in the direction of Granville towards Dungannon, and I think he told me they were doing about 40 mile an hour, and the policeman said to him, "If you had to stop this car, how would you stop her?" And he says, "I just stop it." The policeman says, "Well, when I hit my hand on the dash, you stop the car." So the type of car was, the police had the same cars, they couldn't keep brakes on them, so he couldn't get the car stopped in the right time. So he was done for having bad brakes and everything else, and he was really annoyed at this here. The police had set him up sort of to catch him, so he came home anyway, and he bought a different type of car altogether, a different braking system, and he spent a few days, but he changed this whole braking system onto his car. And about a fortnight or 2 weeks after, again, he was down the road, and same policeman stopped him again. Same thing happened again, going down the road, and he asked him about stopping. He says he could stop, and he says, "When I hit my hand on the dash," he says, "stop." And he hit his hand on the dash before I stood on the brakes. The policeman went straight forward, and there was a wing nut and inside the car, hit the policeman here and opened it. And it was my father had to laugh at the police that day. But then maybe about a week after that, he was up home one day working, and the police landed up to the house, and the 2 cars, I think, with them, and asked him how did he put the brakes in the car, and he told them how he put the brakes in the car, and they said, "Well, tell you the truth, we have the same problem." They asked him could he get braking systems and do their cars, so he done a few police cars that time. He changed the braking systems over to them too and put brakes on them.
And that would have been him, like, there would have been the challenge of getting the brakes onto the car and getting them work. Like, we're talking here now, this was 1956, like, don't forget.
Very young.
56, 55, 56, 57. Well, 56, 57 it would have been.
Young,
and these were Ford Populars and Ford 8s, and that was the type of cars in them times, like, you know what I mean? So, but he managed to get the braking system onto that, it was fairly successful now.
But people probably like my father, and or people like they were into making money. Like it was more the kick of getting the thing up and running and seeing it working. And after it was working, they lost interest in it. He just didn't seem to have the same thing. He had more interest in making machines than money. Money definitely wasn't. He made money in his early days and made a lot of money in his early days, but he spent it too. Like he believed in spending money. He didn't believe in hoarding it or keeping it or investing it. He got rid of it again. But that was the type of man he was. And most inventors are the same. Like they're not in it for the money. They're in it for the enjoyment of and the challenge of putting the thing together and having a success of it.
His whole motto, like down the years, would have been, create employment and keep your children at home. That would have been, and I suppose you see the logic of it today. Whenever the Celtic Tiger in the south and unemployment started here, and most of the children that goes to school that gets educated now has to leave the country to get a job. And in them days, he would have thought it a terrible thing for lads and lassies having to go to England and go to America to get a living. And that would have been what he'd have been pushing all the time from the very early days of designing the machines and building them and creating employment here, 50, 60 people. Then up to the time of Mullins foundries and all that, when they still, and any man or woman that you'd have talked about around the country there, and they'd have said, well, I'll tell you one thing, many of the time things was tight, but we never went home without our wages anyway. And that's one thing, and many of the time things was tight and hard and had to be worked hard to pay off and all the rest. But it was always done, and all of us succeeded in it, But as for the engineering, as Christy says there, for designing them machines and developing them, whenever we look back at what he was doing in them days, with a circuit board and with a set of controls and panels and stuff, he was away out on a different league of his own, and that spoke wonders and spoke volumes, I should say, with the screeners that ended up a worldwide international product that was successful throughout the world, and at the end of the day it was him designed the first one of them and it developed from there. And as I say, that's if he is about today or if he is alive today, I have no doubt he'd be terribly proud of it to be fit to have played such a role in it.
But he had a good understanding of hydraulics and wiring and speeds and all that type of stuff. A lot of this come natural to him, and he couldn't have been taught it because he just understood it. I don't know how it was, but he understood it, and he understood how to put things together very simply, which I wouldn't have the capability to do nothing like that, to tell you the truth. But he had.
But he never took a drink till he was 31, 32 years of age, and then the doctor says to him, you've run to that much pressure and you've that many men working for you and there's that much happening, you should learn to take 2 or 3 bottles of Guinness and learn to relax and a bit of a social life. But I would say probably looking back that was the worst advice ever he got. But at the end of the day, another time he'd say, run me up to Ballygolly there in the evening and that. And the first man he'd bump into would be John Finlay, and go to Mercy and Roy. Many's evening and Roy had been there too. And the two of them had been good friends down through the years, and they'd been reminiscing about different skits and different times and different things that happened, and different plant and different machines, and it wouldn't have mattered who John Finlay is with or who my father had been with. Once they met, the two of them would have great respect and great time for each other, and my father would have thought the world of John Finlay and would have viewed him as a terrible genius of a man. But as time went on, I suppose my grandmother too should have says at them days, your father done everything whenever he was terrible young, in England working on a lathe at 17, 23, 24 years of age, 50, 60 men working with him at engineering, and it wouldn't have mattered what he wanted to design or got half a notion of. Everything seemed to come very natural to him, he never had any problem, and he thought everybody should have been the same, how under God would you not know that, or how could you not see that, and we're talking in a period of time when there was no prototypes, or there was nothing that you could have walked out and drew or went down and took a photograph of. Everything was original, and everything had to be drew up and made work from scratch. Nowadays everything's copied or changed slightly, you know what I mean, and that's the way it is. But my grandmother says, he done everything so young, he'll die young. And my grandmother had been a lady, a terrible, terrible nice woman. And sure enough, he took ill when he was 46, he took cancer. And basically, within a year, he was 48 when he was dead. But even at that time, like he was saying, I have a few ideas here now and I need to get them through down here and I need to get them sorted out here. But unfortunately he died, as I say, at 48, and that was the end of that. There's a photo there of a forklift that he had made and a grab there for P&B Colonies, and that's him sitting on it, only a very, very young fella, and that was back, what, 1960 of that?
That's the only photograph I have of him actually on one of these machines that he invented. And he made a lot of them over a period of years.
There's another photo there of the fellas in Africa where he sent out the block machine and shows him actually working.
He was at a charity do in Tyrone Hall, I think it was 68 or 66, and they were talking about raising money for the missions to build schools, and he seen the way of making blocks out of 4 bits of timber. So he said that he made block machines and he would donate a block machine to send out to Africa. And in fact, he sent to Belfast and he sent it on down and he paid for the whole transport to Africa. And there's the photograph of the way he's actually operated, and the right stuff in the back. The back of it
there's I am sure you recognise the Mullen block machine. It has been a great help to speed up the work. Once again, very many sincere thanks for this act of kindness. One time he says, I must organise meetings about alcoholism. It wasn't so much about drugs at that time. You know, maybe people needing help and stuff like this. And if he'd seen anybody in them situations, he would have been trying to help them, you know. So he arranged for this meeting anyway. And these people came into this hall to talk about alcoholism and addictions and that, you know. And there was a number of priests there and ministers there and nuns there. And this man was explaining about how addictive drink could be and alcoholism and getting help for it. And it was thrown out to the audience then. And asked them what their opinions was, and there was a couple of nuns sitting in the audience, and this nun says, no, she says, I think this is totally down to willpower, nothing else but willpower. And my father says, well, sister, the next time you have the diarrhea, he says, try willpower. And there wasn't many comments after that, but that was just how quick he'd have been, you know, with an answer, like, and the place was rolling around the floor like and the wee nun, I suppose, maybe laughed at it after, but was a bit embarrassed maybe with the idea of the willpower. But that was the type of him, like.
One Christmas, Rough Harold, he tried a wee thing called the Stereophone that you played music on, and God, he had to buy one of them, and he learned to play it, and he could play the drums, and he played the accordion in the band. He was really into music. He loved music.
Killy Mild band, like, well, the pipe band, he was playing the drums in it at a very, very early age. And then the accordion band, he was one of the main men that got the accordion band going in Killymild. He loved the accordion and he loved the pipe music. And as I say, he had maybe 20, 30 men in Killymild band marching on the 17th of March and 15th of August and that. And as they were struck at times, they got a lot of the drums from the Grey Stone bands, and the Grey Stones bands would have got a lot of the drums from them, and that's the way it worked among them. Nowadays, 70%, I think it's 65-70% of the world's screening equipment is built in Ireland, and in fact most of it will be built probably within 15 mile of a radius from here. So, you know, if you take it in that context on a world market and an achievement, you know, if, as I said before, if he was alive or about and was in Africa, India, Australia, America, you name it, Singapore, wherever you want to talk about, and you walk down the street and the next thing you see one of these machines sitting there,
a new version of them,
or a newer version of them, and you turn around and you say, well, how long? You know, God save us, that's unbelievable. Like, that started actually in Killymild, 6 miles outside Dungannon in 1958, 59, 60. You know, it's some achievement. You know, when the men that started up the company in Dungannon at that time and developed it on from that, and that, you know what I mean, you know, they would have knew him extremely well too, and talking to any of them would have the utmost respect and for him, like, you know what I mean, and for his genius in developing stuff. So, like, you know, there's no doubt, a shadow of doubt, that was his field. If you take a look at the amount of companies that exist today in County Tyrone, the spin-off from that early days, God save us, it's unbelievable. From the Loch Shore till Monaghan till Oma, you name it.
started about 10 years ago, part of a community project, or an extension of a community project by an artist, and a crowd of us joined in. Now, some of the skills we had, some we didn't have, basic woodworking and so on, so one person would teach another, and gradually over time we built up some knowledge. And some of the boats that we have made over that time are out there. There are others. We have made boats like these Loch Ness boats. That's one there, and a rather bad print of it. One of the first that we made. In fact, we made two of these, as near as we could to replicate the Loch Ness boat, of the sailing Loch Ness boat about 50 years ago. It's a fishing boat that was much used on the loch. These are Southwest Ireland. These are Kerry and County Clare, and you find these big navogues, as they're known as, curras. I find they're an incredibly beautiful boat when you see them on the water. They are, when you get 3 or 4 people rowing, they're very fast, again, another functional boat, and capable of handling quite heavy weather and seas. The future of curras is very difficult because people use plastic boats now. Everyone wants something with a big engine on the back of it, and they want to go very, very fast and have a sensation of speed. We're trying to maintain a tradition of the boat building side of things, particularly to do with Loch Ness, the craft side of it and the leisure side of it. I'm from England, as you probably guess. When I go over there occasionally, and if I go near any large body of water, it's covered with people in boats. And I come here and it's empty. Nobody uses Loch Ness. Why? I don't know. It's one of the biggest patches of fresh water there is in Europe, and we don't use it. But part of our activity is to make boats that use that water. You sail them and you row them.
We're here standing by the marker which indicates the place where the Ulster Canal system joins the broad waters of Loch Ness. South Loch Ness was once a widely trafficated area for barge and boat traffic. In the early part of the 1800s, this traffic was able to get all the way through on the Ulster Canal right through to Lough Erne. During the latter 1700s, early 1800s, South Loch Ness was really a hive of industry with barges and small boats plying their trade. I have with me the complete works of the local poet Moses Taggart, and in one of his poems he very descriptively describes something of this area, particularly mentioning Coney Island just offshore. There the warriors, knights of old, or saintly men of finer mould, bowed the knee in balmy towers, built their turrets, shrines and towers, shapes that now are crowned with flowers. This was the area that, steeped in antiquity, was joined up in the early 1800s with the shores of Lough Erne.
This is the old, if you like, lockhouse or office of the Upper Bann Navigation Company. Now they controlled the waterway, well, literally from here, or from the Bann Foot, right up to the point of Whitecoat, which is the entrance to the Newry Canal. Now, the point of Whitecoat is where the River Bann and the Newry Canal and the Cusher all separate. It's about a mile beyond Portadown. And at the talk that Tommy asked me to give in the community hall a couple of weeks back, Annie Hamill showed me she showed me an old logbook that her father had, and I got some notes copied out of it, and in fact I have them here. On August the 9th, 1929, the Hibernia passed through here. She was owned by the United Peat Company,
and skippered by Joseph Cushnahan, and she was heading for Toome Bridge with 50 ton of clay on board. And that Hibernia, that's the old boat that lay up at the Ban Breast near the motorway bridge for years, and she's actually been restored, and she's now over at the other side of the loch. And when I say restored, she's now got a bathroom in her, a suite, a wood-burning stove. Beautiful. And the other one, any of you have seen the old barge lying over at Oxford Island? On June the 24th, 1930, the Enterprise passed here. She was owned by Ben Brown, and her master was Richard O'Donnell, and she was going to Kinnigo with 50 ton of sand. And it's ironic that she has ended up again in Kinnigo today. No sand on board, but she has been restored as a little interpretive centre. And Annie was telling me this window here is where the master or the skipper of the lighter would have come over with his papers, and her father would have come out and checked it and estimated the load that was on board, and then they paid so much per ton.
In his book, The Wonder of Working Canal, Mr. Thomas Michael Vanna gives us a wonderful account of the old workings of the canal, and particularly it being dug out by the navvies. Around this area, and at that particular time, the navvies would have camped out in little tents and little huts, sod-made huts, wattle-made huts in particular, canvas cover huts. They lived quite a rough existence. A lot of these navvies came from very far afield. Some actually returned from the United States, where they'd emigrated and they'd got great experience digging out the canals there, particularly the Great Erie Canal that linked up the Erie system in North New York State. The other thing we talks about is their diet. They lived on a very meagre diet, and it was mostly potatoes and bacon, and they would have cooked in these little shanty towns that they built up. And of course that's all disappeared, something of the past and something we can only now read about. You're at the river now, you've left the canal, and if you walk up onto the bridge, you get a wonderful view right down the river and up the river, and you can see the cut where it comes in, where the barge traffic came down the river, and instead of going on round the bend onto the loch, we're able to safely come through the cut. This here is just a picture of the times whenever the plank ferry operated from one side to the other. The vehicle drove onto the ferry. You can see the plank ferry. It was really only a very crude construction on oil barrels, and it was pulled across on a rope, and the local farmers, local people conveniently used this to get from one side, from County Tyrone over here to County Armagh here. And in olden times, actually funerals came across here. They brought the people across to the burying ground here. But it's one of the things of the past that for many, many years it was a very successful enterprise.
I remember my father bringing me over here as a child. We used to come over every summer to get strawberries, and then my mother made strawberry jam. And I remember as a child, or a young fella too, when we had a boat, looking at an old lighter that was sunk in Milltown Bay. And I also heard of the other lighter that was sunk in the river here, coming down from Coal Island with a load of bricks. And here I was just handed that brick a moment or two ago. There's a field up here, seemingly literally full of those. And of course the brick came from Coal Island, and it would have been a load of bricks going somewhere else, Belfast, Newry, or even Coleraine. And sure enough, S. Doran, A. Sloan and Company, coming from Coal Island. It just reminds you how much history there is lying about.
think there are maybe 8 steam engines in Ireland, or 8 beam engines in Ireland. But this one is unique in so much that it was known as a house engine. The housing and the engine, it's all part of the same structure. The engine is built into the structure, and the engine were all constructed together. So from that point of view, it's possibly unique in the British Isles. This is the main pillar, and with the beam running across. This side produced where the steam was used to drive the piston, and that in turn, in actual fact, it drove the crankshaft, which in actual fact turned the wheel and produced the power. There's a little area here, Kinnaird, and Callan was known as Kinnaird before the 1600s. Kinnaird, I think, for those who are authority in Irish, it's top of the hill or the high hill. And it's interesting if you go up to the back of the village and go to the high ground. It's amazing the view that there is. And the view you can see right away down to Borough, down along the river valley. And you also are overlooking, there's a ford of the Blackwater River here, and there's another ford at Glenarm. So like to make from a strategic point of view, you keep an eye on your enemies if you stay on the high ground and have a good view.
There was a castle on this site in the 1560s, a famous character, Shane the Proud, Shane O'Neill. At that time, the O'Neill had his main house and his main castle in this area. Part of it was probably incorporated in this bawn, but this is a plantation bawn that was built in around about 1616. The Priory actually owns the site, but they have a long lease delivered to this to the NIEA Historic Monuments, and they've done a huge amount of work in the last maybe 5, 7, 10 years here. We actually believe that possibly could have been part of the O'Neill's castle, the actual round tower. There used to be a spiral staircase and so forth that went into it. Some of the local people who live in Benburb, the children who were, well, they're not children, they're all old age pensioners now, but when they were children, they remember climbing up onto the top of that edifice over there. This was the headquarters of Owen Roe O'Neill when he before the Battle of Benburb and after the Battle of Benburb. He took over this place and used it as his HQ. So in other words, his army would have been encamped in this area prior to the 6th of June 1646. This is what I talked about up at the front of the castle, as we'll call it, or bawn. This is the back, that's the back of the house there. The rear of the house, you can actually just see through the ivy and the trees. So it was if you can imagine, these trees is all relatively modern by their thickness. So you could actually see right into the road from Armagh from here. So strategically, in the time of the O'Neills, it was an extremely important defensive position. And it was also an important defensive position from the point of view of the plantation, because they could see if there was an Irish attack, they could actually, a native attack, it was easily fortified naturally and not easily accessible. The limestone here is interesting because somebody asked me about limestone gorge. Yeah, this is part of the gorge. The Blackwater River on Owen Moor or on Dall runs right below us here. You can hear it rattling and you'll see it in a minute or two. A very important river in the history of Ulster. The first pass or first crossing on the river was actually here. We have a record of that in the annals in about the 12th or 13th century when St. Benignus tried to cross the river. He was coming from Armagh from his official church in Armagh, and he was doing a visitation in the area, and his boat collapsed here. He was very nearly drowned, and there was a lot of gold and silver that he was taking with him was lost in the river here, just at the back here. Now that actually is a fact. Then the pass on down, which is much easier than it was here, became the pass, and that's the one at Portmore, the Blackwater town. So consequently, it's highly likely that there was some sort of a religious settlement here before the monastic settlement at at Clonfeacle, which would have dated, from about the time of shortly after, from the time of Patrick. You will see that there's a remnants of landscaping here. This was actually artificially created by James Bruce when he built his estate in the late 19th and early 20th century. The sort of telltale signs that you have is the bamboo, which you have grown along the side, and there's very other exotic non-indigenous plants down along towards the salmon lake. Also, you'll get an odd eucalyptus tree up in round here. So this was all man-made and designed to create a very attractive country estate for a very wealthy man who lived in Belfast. There was a lot of mills on the Blackwater from the 17th century and even before it, even in the time of Q O'Neill, there was a lot of mills along the river. The reason they were along the river, of course, water was the main source of power at that time. And this is one of the reasons why you get, there's two down along here. There's one on further up, an old spade mill, just the remnants of it. But as I say, the river was the thing that attracted people because it provided them a source of power before steam. This canal opened in 1842, I think, or 1843 it opened. The railways came to this area, they came to Dungannon in 1854, right through the Moy in that area. So the point about simply is the competition was there. Slightly dearer than canals, but a lot quicker. And in the end of the day, the cost of transport became much more economical to use the railway. Even the further development of this canal after 1846, 47, 48 was an attempt to alleviate the huge damage that was being done by the famine. It was to create some basic employment, and so that's why it was persisted and developed right on from 1840s right into the 1860s and I think 70s probably, when it maybe became defunct.
One day it will always be 5 smile time.
Very welcome. Yeah.
That's quite dear favourite road.
But you would expect that to be sort of wet, yeah, it's not.
See what they're writing up on themselves.
This is the Mass Rock in Corrickhibbert. This was covered for years. It's only about 35 years ago. This was all covered in whin and gorse, and the McElroys uncovered it and found this huge stone. There are 3 crosses in it. Harrison has his hand there on one of them. There are 3 crosses in it. And this was obviously a secluded little glen. It was a mass site in penal times. And Carleton talked, of course, about 3 mass sites when worship was in the open air in the 18th century. Now, we're not sure where those 3 were. One was obviously at the 4th chapel, where there was a mass was said in the ring fort. The other one was probably in the glen behind Johnson's Chapel at Lasson's Hole, because there's a tradition of mass being said in the hollow of that hill behind Johnson's Chapel. This may well have been the 3rd of the 3 mass sites that Carleton talked about in his early days. There was another mass garden in Tulnavert townland up towards Auchanteen, so it could have been Tulnavert. But at any rate, it's a most beautiful site, as you can see, and quite secluded too. There's been people looking out, or lookouts for the redcoats, as they call them, but there have been spies who were informing on the priests who were saying mass. So this is, I think it's a very beautiful site, and thanks to John McElroy, who took his cattle off and took the bull away, you have
We can get
a chance to visit without any harassment.
Yes.
what a bait could I eat? For I thought my love's company for better than me, since love was the cause of my ruin. Oh, the last time I saw her, she was all dressed in white. The more I gazed on her, she dazzled my sight. I lifted my hat and bid her a good night. Here's a due to all full-hearted lovers. So dig me a grave and dig it down deep and strew it all over with primrose so sweet, and lay me down in it, for no more can I weep, since love was the cause of my ruin. Thanks very much.